The rifle barrel pressed cold against Willa Preston's spine as she stood on the porch of her father's homestead, watching three riders approach through the summer dust of 1882. She had buried her father just 2 weeks prior, and already the vultures were circling. Except these vultures wore expensive suits and carried legal papers that meant nothing to her but everything to the territorial courts. "Miss Preston," called out Marcus Hendricks from atop his bay gelding, his voice smooth as creek water over stones but twice as cold. "I have here a document signed by Judge Walton himself. This land belongs to the Hendricks Cattle Company, has for near about 6 months now. Your father, bless his soul, had no legal claim to file. He was squatting on company property." Willa's fingers tightened on the Winchester she held across her chest, not quite pointing it at anyone but making her intentions clear enough. At 23 years old, she had helped her father work every inch of these 200 acres outside Park City, Utah. She had cleared rocks from the fields until her hands bled, had built fences in the scorching heat, had nursed cattle through the brutal winter of 1881, when the snow piled so high they had to dig tunnels to reach the barn. This land was hers by right of blood and sweat, no matter what some paper said. "My father filed his claim proper in '78, she said, keeping her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "We have the papers to prove it. This homestead is legal and binding." Hendricks smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had never lost a thing in his life that he cared to keep. "Those papers were filed incorrectly, Miss Preston. A technicality, perhaps, but the law is the law. Your father forgot to include the proper survey markers in his initial filing. Without those, the claim is invalid. Now, I am a reasonable man. I will give you 1 week to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. After that, my men will remove you by whatever means necessary." The other 2 riders sat silent, hands resting on their gun belts, eyes hidden beneath the brims of their hats. Willa recognized them as hired guns, the kind of men who did Hendricks's dirty work without asking questions or suffering from conscience. "I am not leaving," Willa said, and she raised the rifle just enough to make her point. "You want this land, you will have to kill me for it." Hendricks's smile never wavered. "That can be arranged, Miss Preston. Think carefully about your next move. 1 week." They turned their horses and rode back toward town, leaving Willa alone on the porch with her racing heart and her righteous anger. She knew Hendricks was not bluffing. The man owned half of Summit County already, had judges and sheriffs in his pocket like loose change. Her father had warned her that Hendricks had been eyeing their property, wanted it for the creek that ran through the western pasture, reliable water being worth more than gold in this high desert country. She went inside the small cabin her father had built with his own hands, the logs still smelling faintly of pine pitch, and spread the homestead papers across the kitchen table. She read through them 3 times, searching for any mention of survey markers, any detail that might save her claim. The legal language twisted and turned like a snake, and she could not make sense of half of it. Her father had been a farmer, not a lawyer. He had filled out the papers the best he knew how, had paid his filing fees and worked the land for 4 years to prove it up. That should have been enough. But apparently it was not. Willa slept poorly that night, startling awake at every sound, convinced that Hendricks had decided not to wait the full week. By morning light, she was exhausted and desperate. She needed help, someone who understood the law or at least understood how to fight men like Hendricks. Park City was growing fast with the silver mines bringing in fortune seekers from all over, but it was still a rough town where justice bent toward whoever had the most money. She saddled her father's old mare and rode into town, the July sun already fierce at 8 in the morning. Park City sprawled in the valley like a collection of children's blocks, wooden buildings and tents mixed together, the sound of hammers and saws constant as new structures rose daily. She tied her horse outside the land office and went inside, clutching her papers. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, barely looked at her documents before shaking his head. "These filings are incomplete, miss. Your father should have hired a surveyor to mark the boundaries. Without that, the claim cannot stand." "But he worked the land," Willa insisted. 4 years, just like the Homestead Act requires. He built a house, raised crops, ran cattle. That has to count for something. The clerk shrugged, already turning back to other work on his desk. "Rules are rules, I am afraid. If Marcus Hendricks has a competing claim with proper documentation, there is nothing I can do. You would need to take it up with the territorial court in Salt Lake City, and even then." He trailed off, the implication clear. She had no money for lawyers, no influence with judges. She would lose. Willa left the land office feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, unsure where to turn next, when she noticed a man watching her from across the street. He leaned against a hitching post outside the Silver King Saloon, tall and lean in dusty trail clothes, a black hat pulled low over his eyes. Something about the way he stood, loose and easy but alert, reminded her of a wolf she had once seen in the mountains, dangerous but not aggressive unless provoked. The man straightened and crossed the street toward her, moving with a kind of unconscious grace. As he drew closer, she could see he was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days of stubble on his jaw. His eyes were the color of smoke, gray and steady, missing nothing. "Miss Preston," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I could not help but overhear your conversation with the land clerk. Hendricks is trying to take your place." Willa stiffened, her hand instinctively moving toward the pistol she had tucked in her belt beneath her jacket. "Who are you?" "Name is Yates Lawson," he said. "I've been working for Hendricks the past 2 months, riding fence lines and moving cattle. But I quit this morning when I heard what he was planning to do to you." "Why would you care what happens to me?" Yates looked away, something complicated crossing his face. "Your father helped me out once about a year back. I was passing through, dead broke and half-starved. He gave me work for a week, paid me fair, and never asked questions about where I had come from or what I was running from. I owed him a debt, and now I suppose I owe it to you." Willa studied him carefully, trying to decide if he was telling the truth, or if this was some trick of Hendricks. "What do you know about my situation?" "I know Hendricks had a surveyor alter the boundary maps to show your father's claim overlapping with company land. I know Judge Walton is getting paid under the table to rule in Hendricks's favor on any disputes. And I know Hendricks will not stop with legal papers. If you do not leave voluntarily, he will burn you out or worse." The words hit Willa like cold water. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. "Then what can I do? I cannot fight the law, and I cannot fight Hendricks's hired guns." "You fight by proving the law is on your side," Yates said. "Your father filed his claim legal. If we can prove Hendricks falsified those survey maps, the judge would have no choice but to uphold your homestead. It would be fraud, plain and simple. And how do we prove that? The original survey records would be in the county archive. If we can get hold of those and compare them to what Hendricks submitted, we would have evidence. Problem is, Hendricks has the county clerk paid off too. We would need to break into the archive after hours." Willa blinked. "You are talking about theft." "I am talking about taking back what is rightfully yours," Yates said. His gray eyes locked onto hers, intense and serious. "But I understand if you are not willing to take that risk. It is your life, your land. I am just offering to help if you want it." She thought about her father, about the way he had died fighting a fever that might not have killed him if they had been able to afford a real doctor, instead of just making do with folk remedies. She thought about the cabin he had built, the grave she had dug with her own hands on the hillside overlooking the creek. She thought about Hendricks and his smug smile, about all the other small farmers he had probably crushed under his boot on his way to building his empire. "When do we do it?" she asked. Yates's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened, a hint of approval. "Tonight. The clerk leaves the office at 6. We go in after dark, find what we need, and get out. You should go home, act normal. Do not give Hendricks any reason to think you are planning something. I will meet you at your place an hour after sunset." Willa nodded, her mouth dry. She had never broken the law in her life, had always believed in doing things proper and right. But proper and right had not saved her father, and it would not save her land. Sometimes you had to fight fire with fire, even if it meant getting burned. She rode back to the homestead, her mind spinning with plans and fears. The day dragged by slowly, each hour feeling like a week. She tried to keep busy with chores, feeding the chickens and mucking out the barn, but her thoughts kept circling back to what she was about to do. If they got caught, she would go to jail. Hendricks would get her land anyway, and she would have nothing. But if they succeeded, she might actually have a chance. The sun finally sank behind the Wasatch Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Willa lit a lamp inside the cabin and forced herself to eat some bread and cheese, though she had no appetite. She checked her pistol, made sure it was loaded, then felt foolish because they were supposed to be sneaking, not shooting. Hoofbeats sounded outside just as full darkness settled over the valley. She grabbed the lamp and went to the door, peering out cautiously before recognizing Yates on a rangy buckskin horse. He dismounted and tied the animal to the porch rail, then climbed the steps to join her. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "As I will ever be." They rode together back toward Park City, keeping to the side trails and avoiding the main road. The town glowed with lamplight from saloons and gambling halls, but the land office sat dark and locked on a quieter street. Yates circled around to the back of the building, and they tied their horses in a copse of cottonwood trees where they would not be easily spotted. "There is a window in the back that does not latch properly," Yates whispered. "I noticed it when I was in there filing some paperwork for Hendricks last week." He led her to a small window about 6 feet off the ground. Sure enough, when he pushed on it, the frame gave slightly. He pulled a knife from his boot and worked it into the gap, jimmying the latch until it popped free. The window swung open with a faint creak that sounded loud as thunder in the quiet night. "I will go first," Yates said. He hoisted himself up and through the window with surprising agility, disappearing into the darkness inside. A moment later, his face reappeared. "Come on." Willa was not as graceful, but she managed to scramble through with Yates pulling her arms. She landed hard on a wooden floor, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it. Yates struck a match and found a candle on a nearby desk, lighting it and shielding the flame with his hand. The land office was crowded with filing cabinets and shelves stacked with ledgers and document boxes. It would take hours to search through everything, and they did not have hours. "The survey records would be in the county archive section," Yates said, moving toward a locked door at the back of the room. "Which is of course locked." He knelt in front of the door, pulling 2 thin pieces of metal from his pocket. Willa watched in fascination as he worked the picks into the lock, his face calm and focused. After about 2 minutes, something clicked and the door swung open. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. "Long story," Yates said. "Remind me to tell you sometime." The archive room was smaller but even more crowded, with shelves reaching from floor to ceiling. Yates held the candle high, reading the labels on boxes and ledgers. 1878. That is when your father filed, June of '78. They found the box labeled with that date and pulled it down, setting it on a small table. Inside were dozens of survey maps, some hand-drawn, others more professional. Yates sorted through them quickly, his fingers moving with practiced ease. Finally, he pulled out a rolled map and spread it across the table. "Here," he said, pointing. "This is the original survey of your father's claim. See these boundary markers? They match exactly what is on your homestead papers. The creek runs through the western edge, and the property extends east to that rock formation, the one that looks like a broken tooth." Willa leaned closer, studying the map. "So this proves my father filed correctly." "It proves that according to the original survey, your claim does not overlap with Hendrix's land at all. Now look at this." He pulled another map from his jacket, one he must have taken earlier. "This is the survey Hendrix submitted to the judge. See how the boundary lines are shifted. Suddenly, your property extends onto what he claims is company land, making your father's filing invalid." The difference was subtle but clear once you knew what to look for. Someone had redrawn the boundaries to create the conflict where none had existed before. "We need to take the original," Willa said, already planning on it. Yates rolled the map carefully and tucked it inside his shirt. "Let us get out of here before someone notices the light." They made their way back through the office, Yates replacing everything exactly as they had found it. He blew out the candle and helped Willa climb back through the window, then followed and pulled it closed behind them. They untied their horses and walked them quietly away from the building before mounting and riding hard back toward the homestead. Willa felt like she could breathe again once they were away from town, the stolen map pressed against Yates's chest like a secret promise. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. "What do we do now?" she asked as they slowed the horses to a walk. "We have the map, but how do we use it?" "We need to get it in front of someone who cannot be bought off," Yates said. "The territorial governor, maybe, or a federal marshal, someone with authority over the local courts. The nearest federal marshal is in Salt Lake City." "Then that is where we need to go." Willa felt a flutter of panic. Salt Lake City was 2 days' ride south, maybe 3 if they took it careful. 2 or 3 days away from her homestead, 2 or 3 days when Hendrix could do whatever he wanted with her property. "I cannot leave the land unprotected that long." "You do not have much choice," Yates said gently. "Stay here and Hendrix will have you thrown off by force. Go to Salt Lake and you at least have a chance at real justice." He was right. She knew he was right, but it felt like being asked to cut off her own arm. The homestead was all she had left of her father, all she had left of the life they had built together. They reached the cabin, and Yates tied his horse next to hers. "I should sleep in the barn tonight," he said. "Keep watch in case Hendrix gets impatient." "You can sleep in the cabin," Willa said. "There is a spare room used to be my father's. The bed is still made up." Yates hesitated, and she could see him weighing propriety against practicality. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we leave at first light for Salt Lake. The sooner we get this map to a marshal, the sooner you can come home." Inside, Willa showed him to the small back room where her father had slept. It still smelled like pipe tobacco and leather, familiar and heartbreaking. Yates set his saddlebags in the corner and turned to face her, the lamplight casting shadows across his features. "Thank you," Willa said quietly, "for helping me. You did not have to do this." "Yes, I did," Yates replied. "Your father was a good man. There are not enough of those in the world to let the bad ones grind them into dust." Something in his voice made her curious. "What did you do before you came to Park City?" Yates was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then he sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed, looking suddenly tired. I was a Pinkerton agent for 3 years, working out of Denver. We went after train robbers mostly, sometimes rustlers. I thought I was doing good work, upholding the law. Then we got hired by a mining company to break up a strike. They told us the miners were planning violence, said we were preventing bloodshed. He rubbed a hand over his face, the rasp of stubble loud in the quiet room. We rode in hard, and it turned out the miners were not planning violence at all. They were just trying to feed their families, asking for fair wages. We broke heads anyway because that is what we were paid to do. I watched my partner shoot a man who was just trying to protect his little boy. Killed him dead right there in the street. Willa felt her throat tighten. What happened to your partner? Nothing. The company called it justified force. We got paid and moved on to the next job, but I could not move on. I kept seeing that man fall, kept seeing the look on his boy's face. So I quit, turned in my badge and my weapon, and started drifting. Took whatever work I could find that did not involve hurting people who did not deserve it. That is why you quit working for Hendricks. That is why I will never work for men like Hendricks again. Yates looked up at her, his gray eyes haunted. I cannot undo what I did in that mining camp, but maybe I can help you keep what is yours. Maybe that counts for something. Willa surprised herself by crossing the room and sitting down next to him on the bed. It counts for everything, she said softly. You could have looked the other way, could have kept collecting Hendricks's money and let him crush me. But you did not. That makes you better than you think you are. Yates's gaze held hers, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. She was suddenly very aware of how close he was, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his eyes dropped briefly to her mouth before snapping back up. We should get some rest, he said, his voice rough. Long ride tomorrow. Willa nodded and stood, her legs feeling unsteady. Good night, Yates. Good night, Willa. She went to her own room and lay in bed, listening to the sounds of him settling in across the hall. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally did, she dreamed of gray eyes and quiet promises. They left before dawn, riding south as the sky lightened from black to deep blue to pale gold. Willa had packed light, just a bedroll and some food in her saddlebags, along with her homestead papers and her father's pistol. The original survey map stayed safe inside Yates's shirt, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from sweat and weather. The ride to Salt Lake City took them through high country, following the ridgeline before dropping down into the valleys. They pushed hard, stopping only to rest the horses and eat cold meals from their supplies. Yates was mostly quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. On the second evening, they made camp in a grove of aspens near a small stream. Willa unsaddled the horses while Yates built a fire, and they ate beans and bacon cooked in a tin pan. The night was cool, and Willa huddled close to the flames, feeling the exhaustion of 2 days in the saddle settling into her bones. Tell me about your father, Yates said suddenly. What was he like? Willa smiled, surprised by the question. He was stubborn, she said. Once he got an idea in his head, you could not shake it loose with dynamite. When he decided to file a homestead claim in Utah, my mother begged him to stay in Missouri where we had family and steady work. But he wanted his own land, wanted to build something from nothing. So we packed up everything we owned into a wagon and came west. Your mother came too. She died the first winter. Pneumonia. We did not have proper shelter yet, just a tent and some tarps. The cold got into her lungs and never let go. Willa stared into the fire, remembering those awful weeks. My father blamed himself. He worked twice as hard after that, building the cabin, breaking the soil. I think he was trying to prove her sacrifice had not been for nothing. How old were you? 16. Old enough to work alongside him, but not old enough to stop him from driving himself into the ground. She glanced at Yates across the fire. He never really recovered from losing her. Oh, he kept going, kept working the land, but there was a sadness in him that never left. I think part of him was almost relieved when the fever came, like he was finally going to see her again. Yates was quiet for a moment, then said, "You must miss them terribly. Every single day." Willa wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. "But I am angry too, furious that they worked so hard for nothing. If Hendricks takes that land, it means my parents died for nothing. I cannot let that happen." "You will not," Yates said with quiet certainty. "We have the evidence we need. The marshal will listen. And if he does not, then we will make him listen." There was something almost fierce in his voice, a determination that matched her own. Willa felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost overwhelmed her. This man, who barely knew her, who owed her nothing, was risking everything to help her fight. She wanted to tell him what that meant to her, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she stood and crossed to his side of the fire, sitting down close enough that their shoulders touched. Yates went very still, like he was afraid any movement might spook her. "I am glad you are here," she said simply. "So am I." They sat together watching the fire burn down to embers, neither speaking, neither needing to. When Willa finally retreated to her bedroll, she slept better than she had in weeks. They reached Salt Lake City late the next afternoon, the city sprawling out across the valley in neat, orderly blocks. The Mormon settlers had built well, with wide streets and solid buildings, everything laid out with careful precision. It was bigger than Park City, more established, and Willa felt small and overwhelmed as they rode down Main Street looking for the federal marshal's office. They found it in a brick building near the center of town, an American flag hanging limp in the still air. Yates tied the horses and they went inside, the interior cool and dim after the bright sunlight. A deputy sat behind a desk, his feet propped up, reading a newspaper. "We need to see the marshal," Yates said. The deputy barely looked up. "He is busy, come back tomorrow." "This cannot wait until tomorrow." Willa stepped forward, pulling her homestead papers from her jacket. "A man named Marcus Hendricks is trying to steal my land through fraud. We have evidence." That got the deputy's attention. He swung his feet down and actually looked at them, his eyes narrowing as he took in their dusty trail clothes and determined expressions. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that proves Hendricks falsified survey maps to make it look like my homestead claim was invalid." Willa placed her papers on the desk. "I need to speak with the marshal now. Every hour we delay is another hour Hendricks has to cover his tracks or intimidate witnesses." The deputy hesitated, then stood and disappeared through a back door. They could hear muffled voices, and then a new man emerged, older and carrying the weight of authority in his bearing. He had a thick mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I am Marshal Grant," he said. "You are accusing Marcus Hendricks of fraud." "Yes, sir," Willa said, and proceeded to lay out the whole story. She showed him her father's original homestead papers, explained how Hendricks claimed they were invalid, and then Yates produced the survey map they had stolen from the county archive. "This proves the boundaries were changed after my father's filing. Someone altered the records to create a conflict where none existed." Marshal Grant studied the map carefully, comparing it to the copy Hendricks had filed with the territorial court. His expression grew progressively grimmer. "Where did you get this original survey?" "From the county land office in Park City," Willa said, deciding honesty was the best approach. "We borrowed it without permission. You mean you stole it? I mean I took back evidence that proves I am the legal owner of my land. Willa met his gaze squarely. Hendricks has the county clerk and the local judge in his pocket. There was no other way to get the truth in front of someone who might actually care about justice. Marshall Grant's mouth twitched beneath his mustache, something that might have been amusement. You have backbone, Miss Preston. I will give you that. He rolled up the maps and tapped them against his palm, thinking. Marcus Hendricks is a powerful man with powerful friends, but falsifying government documents is a federal crime, and that puts it in my jurisdiction. If what you are saying is true, he is going to answer for it. Relief flooded through Willa so fast she felt dizzy. So you will help me. I will investigate the claims, but I want you to understand something. Investigating is not the same as proving. Hendricks will have lawyers, good ones, and they will fight this every step of the way. You need to be prepared for a long battle. I am prepared for whatever it takes, Willa said. Marshall Grant nodded. All right then. I will ride up to Park City tomorrow with a couple of deputies. We will examine the archive records, interview witnesses, and see what kind of case we can build. In the meantime, you two should find a place to stay. There is a boarding house 2 streets over that rents rooms cheap. They thanked the marshal and left, stepping back out into the afternoon heat. Willa felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, like she could finally breathe again. She turned to Yates, and before she could think better of it, she threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug. Yates stiffened in surprise, then slowly wrapped his arms around her, holding her gently. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, steady and strong. Thank you, she whispered into his shirt. Thank you for believing me. Always, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. They found the boarding house and rented 2 rooms, side by side on the 2nd floor. The rooms were small but clean, with real beds and wash basins. Willa cleaned up as best she could, washing the trail dust from her face and hands, then changed into her only other dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days. She brushed out her hair, surprised at how long it had gotten, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. There was a knock on her door, and she opened it to find Yates standing in the hallway. He had cleaned up too, shaved and changed his shirt, and he looked younger without the trail, grime, and stubble. His gray eyes widened slightly when he saw her. I thought we could get some dinner, he said. Celebrate a little. The boarding house owner recommended a restaurant down the street. That sounds wonderful. They walked together through the cooling evening, the streets quieter now as people headed home from work. The restaurant was modest but welcoming, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of roasting meat. They ordered steak and potatoes, and Willa realized she was ravenous. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a hot meal that she had not cooked herself over a campfire. What will you do if you win? Yates asked as they ate. Keep running the homestead yourself, Willa considered the question. I do not know if I can manage it alone. It is a lot of work for one person, especially during harvest season. My father and I barely kept up together. She paused, then added, but I will figure it out. I have to. You could hire help. With what money? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. We were barely scraping by as it was. My father spent everything we had on supplies and livestock. There is nothing left to pay wages. Yates pushed food around his plate, not meeting her eyes. What if you had a partner, someone to help work the land and share the load? Willa's heart skipped a beat. Are you offering? I am saying I do not have anywhere else to be. He looked up at her then, his expression unguarded. I have been drifting for 2 years, taking whatever work I can find, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. But these past few days, helping you fight for your home, it has felt like something worth doing. Like maybe I could put down roots somewhere and stop running from my past. Yates. Willa did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to grab onto this lifeline he was offering. But another part, the practical part that sounded like her father, worried about the implications. You barely know me. What if we drive each other crazy after a month? Then I will leave and you will be no worse off than you are now. He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. But I do not think that will happen. I think we work well together. And I think maybe we could build something good if we tried. Willa looked at their joined hands, feeling the roughness of his palm, the strength in his grip. She thought about the way he had risked everything to help her, the way he had listened to her stories about her parents without judgment, the way he made her feel less alone in the world. "All right," she said softly. "If I keep my land, if the marshal rules in my favor, then yes, be my partner. Help me make the homestead everything my father dreamed it could be." Yates smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face and made him look almost boyish. "Deal." They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, talking about practical things like crop rotation and fence repairs, but beneath it all ran a current of something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. When they returned to the boarding house, Yates walked Willa to her door and they stood in the narrow hallway facing each other. "Good night, Willa," he said. "Good night, Yates." Neither of them moved. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. Finally, Yates reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I am glad I met you," he said quietly. "I am glad you met my father," she replied, and then, feeling bold, she leaned up and kissed his cheek, just a quick press of lips against stubbled skin. Yates went very still, his eyes darkening. For a moment, Willa thought he might kiss her properly, and her pulse raced at the possibility. But instead, he stepped back and gave her a small nod before retreating to his own room. She heard his door close and let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Inside her room, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening over and over in her mind. She barely knew this man, had only met him 4 days ago, yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. It was more than gratitude, more than physical attraction, though there was certainly that too. It was a sense of recognition, like finding something she had not known she was searching for. She drifted off to sleep thinking about gray eyes and gentle hands, about a future that might include partnership and laughter and maybe, someday, love. Marshal Grant rode out to Park City the next morning with 2 deputies in tow. Willa and Yates followed a few hours later, not wanting to get in the way of the official investigation, but needing to be nearby in case they were needed. They arrived in town by late afternoon to find the marshal's horses tied outside the land office. "Should we wait here?" Willa asked anxiously. "Let us go to the homestead," Yates suggested. "If the marshal needs us, he knows where to find us." But Willa felt too restless to leave town without knowing what was happening. They tied their horses near the land office and walked down to the general store, buying a few supplies they did not really need just to have something to do with their hands. The storekeeper, an elderly man named Mr. Chen, gave them a knowing look. "Heard the marshal is asking questions about Marcus Hendricks," he said quietly as he wrapped their purchases in brown paper. "About time someone stood up to that man. He has been pushing people around for too long." "You know something about what he has been doing?" Yates asked. Mr. Chen glanced around to make sure no one else was in the store. "I know he ran 3 families off their claims last year using the same trick he is trying on Miss Preston. Says their paperwork is invalid, gets the judge to rule in his favor, then swoops in and takes the land for pennies on the dollar. Everyone knows it is crooked, but nobody wants to speak up and risk becoming his next target." "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Willa asked. Tell the marshal what you know." The old man hesitated, fear flickering across his weathered face. "Hendricks is a dangerous man, miss. If I speak against him and he walks away free, he will make sure I pay for it. But if enough people speak up, he cannot retaliate against everyone," Yates pointed out. "The only reason men like Hendricks have power is because good people are too afraid to oppose them." Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are right. I am tired of being afraid. If the marshal wants to talk to me, you tell him I will tell him everything I know." They left the store feeling a spark of hope. If there were others willing to testify, willing to share their own experiences with Hendricks's tactics, it would strengthen Willa's case enormously. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through town, quietly talking to shopkeepers and residents, asking if anyone else had been victimized by Hendricks. They found 4 more people willing to talk to the marshal, including a widow who had lost her husband's ranch to Hendricks under suspicious circumstances, and a farmer who had been forced to sell his land for a fraction of its value after Hendricks had his water rights mysteriously revoked. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, painting a picture of systematic corruption and intimidation. By evening, Marshal Grant emerged from the land office looking grim. He spotted Willa and Yates waiting across the street and waved them over. "I have seen enough," he said without preamble. The survey maps were definitely altered. The paper stock does not even match between the original filing and what Hendricks submitted to the court. It is sloppy work, really. They were counting on nobody looking closely enough to notice. "So what happens now?" Willa asked. "Now, I arrest Marcus Hendricks on charges of fraud and falsifying government documents." Marshal Grant's expression was hard. "I also need to have a conversation with Judge Walton about how a sitting judge failed to catch such obvious forgery. Either he is incompetent or complicit, and either way he has no business wearing that robe." Relief washed through Willa, so intense it made her knees weak. Yates steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his touch grounding her. "When will you make the arrest?" Yates asked. "Right now." "He is at his ranch about 5 miles east of town. I am riding out there with my deputies. You two should stay here. If things go badly, I do not want you caught in the crossfire." "That is my land he tried to steal," Willa said firmly. "I am coming with you." Marshal Grant looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Willa's expression must have changed his mind. "Fine, but you stay back and let us handle it. This is official federal business now." They rode out to the Hendricks ranch in the fading light, a group of 6 now with the marshal, his 2 deputies, Willa, Yates, and a local deputy who knew the way. The ranch was impressive, with a large main house built from stone and timber, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, hundreds of them, representing wealth beyond Willa's comprehension. Hendricks emerged from the house as they rode up, his face darkening when he saw the marshal. "What is the meaning of this?" Marshal Grant dismounted and pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "Marcus Hendricks, I am arresting you for fraud, falsification of government documents, and conspiracy to deprive a lawful homesteader of her property rights. You have the right to answer these charges before a federal judge." Hendricks laughed, but it was a cold, ugly sound. "You cannot be serious." "On whose authority?" "On the authority of the United States government." Marshal Grant's voice was flat and hard. "And on the evidence we recovered from the Park City land office showing you submitted falsified survey maps to invalidate Miss Preston's claim. That is preposterous. I have lawyers who will tear your case apart. Then they can do it in federal court." The marshal nodded to his deputies, who moved forward with shackles. For a moment, Willa thought Hendricks might resist. She saw his hand twitch toward the gun on his hip, saw the calculation in his eyes. But then he looked at the 6 people facing him and seemed to realize he was outmatched. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he held out his hands for the shackles. "This is not over," he said, his eyes finding Willa in the gathering darkness. "You think you have won, but you have no idea what you have started." "I think I have ended it," Willa said clearly. "You will not steal anyone else's land, and you will not intimidate anyone else into silence. Your time is finished." They took Hendricks back to Park City and locked him in the small jail behind the sheriff's office. The sheriff, who had been noticeably absent during the arrest, suddenly appeared looking nervous and confused. Marshal Grant had a brief, pointed conversation with him that Willa could not quite hear, but the sheriff went pale and nodded rapidly at whatever the marshal was saying. "Your homestead is secure," Marshal Grant told Willa as they stood outside the jail. "I have filed paperwork with the territorial court invalidating Hendricks's claim and affirming your father's original filing. The land is legally yours, no question." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, a combination of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you, Marshal. I do not know how to repay you. No repayment necessary. This is my job." But he smiled slightly. "Though I am glad we could help. Not every case ends this well." Willa and Yates rode back to the homestead in the dark, guided by moonlight and the familiar path. When the cabin came into view, Willa felt something ease in her chest. Home. It was still hers. She dismounted and just stood for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet. "You did it," Yates said softly, coming to stand beside her. "You fought for your land and you won." "We did it," Willa corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." They stood close together, shoulders touching, looking at the cabin her father had built. Willa thought about everything that had happened in the past week, how close she had come to losing everything, how this stranger had become someone she trusted more than anyone else in the world. "Yates," she said quietly, "that offer you made about being partners, did you mean it?" "Every word." She turned to face him fully, her heart pounding. "What if I want more than just a business partnership?" In the moonlight, she saw his expression change, saw understanding and hope flare in his eyes. "What do you want, Willa?" "I want someone to share this life with. Not just the work, but everything else too. The quiet evenings and the hard winters and the spring planting. I want someone who understands what this place means to me, who will fight for it the way I will fight for it." She took a breath. "I want you if you want me." Yates reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "I have wanted you since the moment you stood on that porch with your rifle, ready to go to war for your home. You are the bravest person I have ever met, Willa Preston, and I would be honored to stand beside you for whatever time you will have me." Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste peck she had given him in the boarding house. This was deep and slow and full of promise, his lips moving against hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all her gratitude and hope and the beginnings of love. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I am not much," he said quietly. "I do not have money or property or even a good reputation. All I can offer you is hard work and loyalty and whatever future we can build together." "That is everything I need," Willa whispered back. They took care of the horses together, working side by side in comfortable silence, then went into the cabin. It was late. They were both exhausted, but neither of them wanted the night to end. They sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee Willa brewed, talking about plans for the homestead, about what crops to plant in the spring and how to expand the herd. "We will need to hire extra hands for harvest," Yates said. "Even with 2 of us working, it is too much land to manage alone." The problem is paying them. What if we took a different approach? Instead of hiring hands for wages, we could bring in another homesteader as a partner, someone who needs land but does not have their own claim yet. We could split off 20 acres, help them get established, and in exchange, they help us work the main property. Willa considered it. That could work. We would need to find the right person, though, someone we can trust. We will know them when we see them, Yates said confidently. They talked until the candles burned low, and then Willa walked Yates to her father's room. They stood in the doorway, neither quite ready to separate. "This feels fast," Willa said softly. "We have known each other less than a week." "Does it feel wrong?" Yates asked. She thought about it honestly, searching her heart for doubt or reservation. But all she found was certainty, a bone-deep knowing that this was right, that he was right. "No, it feels like the most right thing I have ever done." "Then maybe sometimes fast is exactly what you need." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, gentle and sweet. "Good night, Willa. Sleep well." "Good night, Yates." She lay in bed listening to him move around in the next room, hearing the creak of the bee.